I will turn it over to Kyle Packham. He's the Chief Advocacy and Affairs Officer for the California Special Districts Association. He's going to be talking all about special districts. So go ahead and take it away, Kyle.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you everybody for your time today. When Mia and I and Christina and I and our whole teams got together and started talking about how to make this whole uh, event happen and what we might want to talk about, we figured we ought to start from the fundamentals. And what I think we've all found as we've gone out and about, and whether we're talking to congressional representatives in DC, or we're talking to state lawmakers in the Capitol, or even talking with local jurisdictions and special districts, even some special district officials themselves, as there can be a lot of misunderstandings about special districts. Even if perhaps you are a special district official or you've been working in local government for a long time, you may not have sort of a shared framework for how you're thinking about special districts or talking about special districts. And so before we dive into the other webinars and the tour and the other activities we have planned for this cohort, we wanted to start with a simple about special districts. Think about them like this, spark some conversation, and really start with something that we can all talk about. And I think that that is another thing that Mia and I have been talking about, is that I'm looking at this series that we're all doing together as more like a graduate level cohort, right? Where most of the learning that you're doing hopefully is not coming from me or your other presenters, but really is coming from yourselves to each other. Uh, there's a shared understanding and knowledge base and experience in this virtual room here, and that you'll see on the bus when we do the tour, et cetera, that goes far beyond certainly my years and experience, but I think any one of the presenters that you're going to hear from. So really, I'm going to try to spark some conversation, give a shared framework for some of our conversations that are going to be going forward. And let's have some questions, Q&A, and discussion when I'm done here. So to kick things off, we'll move forward to how do we describe special districts? And Dane used one of the key words, that's local service specialists. So those are three words that can go together or be pulled apart, but they all are very descriptive of special districts. They're highly localized. They focus on typically one service, and the whole idea behind all of it is specialization. That is the magic ingredient. That's where you get the opportunities. And I believe when done well, you get a lot of advantages that you can leverage for your community, for your region, for the people that we're all serving together. So we'll go ahead and move forward into the next element that I want to talk about, and that is just, well, what do they do? So special districts are not unique to California. They're actually all over the country, and we're going to give some examples of the scope and scale of that. But here in California, nearly 200,000 people are employed by special districts across the state. And as you can see from the infographics on your page, it varies widely. About a third of them do water, and then about 10 or 15% wastewater. There's a handful that do electricity. I think we're all very fortunate in the Sacramento area to benefit from one of those that happens to have, I think, some of the most competitive, greenest, and democratic, rates that you can find. And then we get the opportunity to then, as the people, own that infrastructure, which is really fantastic. And then we get an elected board in order to oversee it. And those are some of the advantages of special districts, no matter what they do. Uh, Obviously, fire protection, largely one of our other larger segments of membership, and then rec and park. And you'll see those pretty heavily weighted in your cohort that you see. There are also some other specializations out there, though. Ports and harbors. One of the bigger ports in the state, Port Hueneme, is ran by the Oxnard Harbor District. Up in the north part of the state, the Humboldt Bay is ran by a special district. And if we end up ever doing that offshore wind, it's almost a certainty that at least one of the biggest shares of that's going to be coming out of that harbor up there. Airport districts, you'll see in Monterey, an airport district. In Sacramento, our airport is ran by the county, which is another great model for doing it. But if you go up to, let's say, Truckee, that one's ran by an airport district. So you can see them in all different shapes. A big one, not necessarily in numbers, but in terms of geography, would be mosquito and vector control districts. Of course, in Sacramento, we have the SAC-YOLO mosquito and vector control district, covers 2 counties. We obviously have transit. SAC-RT is a dependent special district. Flood control, we have Reclamation District 1000 that provides flood protection to major portions of Sacramento. So Sacramento is, and the Sacramento region is really a great example of some of the diversity. It really has a plethora of different special districts providing all different types. So moving forward, now that you kind of have a scope and scale of who they are, well, what are they exactly? So I'll go into that again. I have heard many people, unfortunately, describe special districts as quasi-governmental. When I do hear that, I'm quasi confused because I'm not sure what it means exactly. I really think they say it just because it's a government that they haven't maybe heard of or don't fully understand. So they're sort of afraid to say exactly what it is because they don't exactly know, right? And I think that that's, sometimes people think that because they don't fully understand special districts, that somehow they may not be as transparent or accountable as responsive. I'll share how I think that's not the case at all. And in fact, I think they make up for that or more than make up for maybe some of that confusion. And I really believe that for the most part, unfortunately, our electorate is just generally civically uneducated. Entirely, right? It's not unique to special districts. The average person probably doesn't know who the vice president of the United States is, probably doesn't know who the speaker of the assembly is. They probably, many of them, I used to live in the unincorporated area east of the city of Sacramento in the Arden Arcade area. And most of my neighbors thought they lived in the city of Sacramento because it said Sacramento on their address, right? And so I think people are sort of confused into believing that they know what a city is or what a county is, particularly a city, because they see it on TV and because every time they fill out a form, used to be every time they wrote a letter, but nobody does that anymore. But every time they fill out a form on the internet, right, they have to write in a name for the spot they see city. So even if you live in Arden or where I live now in Fair Oaks, you write that as your city, even though it's not a city. Then they get confused when they call 911 and the deputy sheriff shows up, right? And they don't get that. So I really think that it's kind of a civic education issue, and that's why we're doing what we're doing today, right? So that we can all know, help us talk and collaborate with each other, and of course, help educate the public as well. So they are public agencies. The unique thing about a special district is they're created for a specific need. Usually it's one need. Sometimes it can be, a couple. Casumnes Community Services District down in the Elk Grove area obviously does both parks and fire protection because of a consolidation that happened over time. But one is by far the most common throughout special district land. These are essential services. They are not overlapping services. People think sometimes that special districts are redundant to a city or a county. But just like a city is not redundant to a county, a special district that's overlapping is also not redundant. And of course, the local agency formation commissions out there, the LAFCOs, have a lot to do with that. They ensure that we're complementing, not competing. They are funded by the local community, accountable to that community, and we believe really have an opportunity to be probably on the most flexible and adaptable side of things, because they're not providing the full array of services, right? So it just gives you an advantage in that way to be able to be a little bit more flexible. So if we'll move forward, uh, here we have just an idea again, because you might sometimes see more special districts by number in rural inland areas of the state. It doesn't mean that they don't overlap with urban and incorporated communities. It's actually, they do both. In terms of population, there's more population served in the urban communities. They just tend to be a little bit more regional in nature. So you'll see special districts that look more like Sac Metro Fire, right? And less like the small little volunteer fire departments that serve, a couple hundred people out in the far eastern areas of the state. Um, they do come in large and small though, and they do provide lots of our critical infrastructure. Moving forward here on the next slide, you'll see that it breaks down just the types of government. And this is, again, this is just fundamental. So reiterating that what do special districts do? It's specialized municipal services, typically one. Cities, you all obviously understand that they do general purpose municipal services as well as land use within those incorporated areas. So, they're doing the zoning, they're doing the permitting, And then you have your counties, which obviously on top of those things are also providing all of those state mandates in the health and human services area, as well as county sheriffs, courts, jails. So it's a lot to handle. The requirements, the expectations in terms of the breadth, obviously so much larger. And I say this isn't, none of this presentation is in any way to say that any one form of government is somehow qualitatively better or worse. It's just showing the differences. And then from understanding those differences, you can understand how that translates into how they do service, what they're thinking about, what they're not thinking about, where they're putting their time and focus and energy, and how that works in terms of the quilt work and the fabric of the services we provide, and then how communities might choose to take advantage of some of those things. And obviously, that's a decision for the community to decide how to best meet its needs, what it can afford, what it wants to prioritize, and how it wants to do that service. So this next slide shows a visualization of this that I really enjoy because it really shows that, and each community is going to look a little bit different, how this puzzle is going to look. But there's really this bridge between the residents and those residents meeting their needs. And so any different community, this bridge, these planks might look different. They might look bigger, smaller in some, or there might be more pieces to it. But in general, you have the fundamentals that the county is providing. And then where there is a city, you have that additional step of specialization and local control provided by that city to that particular community, sometimes an enhanced level of service. And then you've got that special district that can get that last leg of the bridge where the community has decided it has a particular need that needs to get filled. So that's a need that's not being met or is not being met in the way that the community wants otherwise. And so those bridge planks just keep getting built until you can bridge over to the needs. And then in the next image that you're going to see here, in a moment, you're going to see kind of how that looks from a localization and specialization standpoint. But first, let's talk about why special districts. So kind of broken it down into four overarching categories here. And in some cases, maybe there's multiple. Typically, though, you're going to create a special district or stick with one because of one of or more of these reasons. First of all, it might just be a need that's not getting met. Um, this is going to be more typical probably in a rural unincorporated area where you have a community that's, it's small, it's rural, it's maybe very independently minded, and the people have finally decided, hey, like we're afraid of fires, or we really need better medical care. Our community is getting older. We want to make sure our response times are higher. We're going to create a fire protection district. We don't want all the trappings of a city. We're concerned about sprawl or urbanization or taxes or whatever. We just want fire. And so, they just want a specific need to be met. Maybe their water quality is being degraded, and so they want to create a sanitation district just to provide, that sewer service. Maybe their wells are running dry and they need to create a water district for water reliability. And this is really how the first special district was created, the Turlock Irrigation District back in 1887 in California. California's first special district was created because farmers said, hey, if we band together, right, we pitch in our resources together, we'll elect our board to govern this and make sure it's local and it does what we want, how we want it, but we're willing to pitch in, tax ourselves, charge ourselves fees, right? In order to raise all of our ships, in order to provide that water reliability for all of us. And that's kind of the story of your typical special district, just at different scales and in different ways. And so number two, would be the desire to elevate a level of service, perhaps. I've in the community that I'm from, originally out in the Hemet San Jacinto Valley area, essentially, as that the story's been told to me, the community said, we really want to pride ourselves in these families having a place to go recreate and a place to have great parks and great rec leagues and everything. And so they built a regional recreation and park district to really tax themselves, but make sure that money, they wanted to make sure it went into those parks. That was a high value for the area, and they wanted to elevate that level of service. And so they did that. Economies of scale is a possibility. Certainly, you could imagine in the case of whether it's sewer or any other type of service where, if each and every jurisdiction is having to do that one thing, there can be advantages to regionalizing that over greater area. You'll see even more of that out in the Bay Area. And I think as communities start to evolve, like we talked about in the Sacramento region, you may see slowly over time that to continue in places like a Sacramento and a growing area. Custom tailored services, funding, and governance. People, they want local control, both in terms of what government looks like and how they get charged for that government. And so it does give them options in that regard. And then, my personal favorite, I think when done well, and that's an important caveat, right? When well led in terms of a governance standpoint, and well led in terms of the specialists that are selected by those governing bodies, special districts do really have a chance to enhance efficiency, effectiveness, innovation, and sustainability. And if you think about it, that's because they're focusing on doing one thing that people need, that the people that are running it care about and focus on becoming specialized in, and doing it over the long haul. And it tends to push out those planning horizons, and really prioritize what they're doing right now, and minimize the distractions. And so as we move forward, I'll explain this kind of in a story format, right? So in this next slide, you think about this from so this is that visualization I was telling you about, right? So the specialization, as you get sort of into that more specialized government, into that more localized government, that maybe you might see smaller government in many ways, not in all ways, but you tend to enhance specialization, you tend to enhance localization. So here's a pictorial story. I love this book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Not sure if any of you have read it. If you haven't, I'd highly recommend it. He talks about two things, the hedgehog concept and level 5 leadership. The hedgehog concept is the one that I'll mention, and that's where you focus on doing one thing and doing it really well. And he talks about it from a business standpoint. That's what changes from a good business to a great business. I think it can apply in a governance standpoint too. And so this next slide, you'll see, imagine if you had uh, a shoe company or if your airline company was making shoes, right? Doesn't sound very great. Southwest Airlines, great airline, I'm a member. Wouldn't necessarily buy shoes from them. And then the next slide, you'll see, well, how about McDonald's? Maybe you'll go get a Happy Meal there with the kids, but you probably don't want Ronald McDonald taking you and your family up into the friendly skies. Move on forward. We talked about shoes. I'll wear some Nikes, play some basketball in them. Don't want to eat their pizza. Okay. So this is where you can see, with businesses, you see why specialization can lead to sort of great products. And the opportunity is also there in special districts. And that's that specialization that Dane was talking about that. Moving forward, after a little bit of levity. So how do we form them? How do we govern them? It's a voter-driven process, regardless. There are multiple pathways to getting there. I'm not going to go over all of those for you right now. We can talk about that in the discussion later to the extent there's interest, or maybe some of our special district officials who know their origination story can talk about it a little bit. The most typical type at this point would be that a community of residents decides they want a special district, and so they petition their LAFCO. There's a required sort of number of signatures. There's a few steps they have to do. They have to do an economic feasibility study. Many LAFCOs require a CEQA analysis. Then the LAFCO does its own economic feasibility and discussion at the LAFCO level amongst its board. The LAFCO commission takes a vote. Then there's an opportunity for the community if they want to protest that action. So that creates an opportunity for a vote of the full community. Oftentimes, there's a funding requirement in there, depending on the type of service and whether ends can meet. Um, that would either be fee-based or taxes or an assessment or combination thereof. If it's a tax for special districts, all taxes are special taxes. And so that requires then at that point a 2/3 vote of the community. And that's typically be tied to as a condition to formation. So it's a long process, as you can imagine, very involved, very engaged. All the stakeholders, the neighboring local government agencies would be involved in that conversation. But at the end of the day, it's voter driven. And that's the important part to think about is no matter what the mechanism is, it's voter driven. Special districts have to follow all the same sunshine laws as cities and counties, Brown Act, California Public Records Act, contracting laws, et cetera. How are they funded? Myriad of funding options. You tend to have some types of special districts that are more heavily funded by non-enterprise revenues, others that are more heavily funded by enterprise revenues, but the vast majority receive at least a little bit of both and diversify their revenue portfolio in different ways. As we all know, it's not easy to fund any government service these days in California. When you layer in Prop 13 and Prop 218, any number of other lawsuits out there that have restricted our ability to raise revenues. But they find ways to get the job done. And so you'll see that here, very little state or federal funding. Cities and counties receive a lot more state and federal funding than special districts do. They're oftentimes 100% locally revenue driven. In terms of local property tax, statewide, special districts get about 8%, so a very small share of the local property tax will go to special districts, but it really is the mother's milk of special districts, particularly for your rec and park districts and your fire protection districts. Assessments, special assessments are one of the main ways of getting revenue in there, and then you'll have your Mello-Roos or your community facilities districts that are very popular in sort of those new building areas, right, where it's a much easier method of passing revenues. Service fees, certainly for water and wastewater and electricity, number one. That's relatively to the others a much easier pathway toward generating revenue. Development impact fees have become more and more important with rising costs and limitations on other revenue sources. Of course, grants are something that everybody wants to get, but very difficult to rely on. Our resource conservation districts, some of them are almost entirely grant funded, which is very interesting. They get very little property tax, actually, and it's a real challenge for them in terms of having overhead funding. So moving on past the how they're funded, and we're kind of driving toward a close here, and we'll open it up to Q&A and discussion. This slide here, this is a US based percentages of revenue for these types of services across the country. So it just gives you an idea of the really the scope and scale of special districts across the country. So there's about 40,000 special districts across the country. In California, we have 2,000 independent special districts. And you can see that it is a giant chunk of our essential infrastructure and essential services in the United States that is provided by special districts. So it is important that we figure out how to collaborate best and partner together to serve our communities and our regions. But I would say that they are oftentimes really doing more than less. I think all of us in local government land are doing that. But looking at these numbers just help to point out that wow, like, they're getting 8% of the property tax and yet they're doing all of this. And we really couldn't live without these things. Our economy couldn't thrive without these things. So next slide here. What we're going to see are just a closing kind of comment here. 5 things about special districts. And obviously, this is a positive, affirmative sort of conversation here that I'm framing this all as. And so, I really do think that they are, when you think about it, you think about some of California's biggest challenges, and you'll oftentimes see a local government for sure, and many times a special district that's at the forefront of some of those biggest challenges, whether it's sustainability and resiliency. I don't know if anybody got a chance to click that video that Mia sent out earlier to everybody in the lead in, but you can see some of the things that special districts are doing. I mean, just look around our region, right? Look at SMUD, look at how progressive it is on the environmental resiliency front, and you'll see a special district right at that forefront pushing the envelope. Orange County Water District down in Orange County has done phenomenal work from a water recycling standpoint. I mean, world leading type work, right? The work that AC Transit did in that video in terms of a very thoughtful, partnership with Stanford University on trying to figure out what are the alternative fuels that are best for running a large transit system. Um, a much smaller district like Paradise Rec and Park District that's also featured in that district, talking about how to use parks in terms of wildfire resiliency, or Sonoma Water District and its, really world leading efforts in terms of that video was shot before anybody knew what an atmospheric river was, pretty much, except scientists and those water agencies out in the Bay Area that were already getting at how do we do radar to specifically target and plan for this from a water resiliency standpoint, from a flood control standpoint. Um, and so that speaks to the idea that specialization can lead to, this innovation because you just have time and focus to think about that stuff to that degree that you need, to where you're in those communities constantly. And that's from a governance down to, entry level job standpoint, right? Governance connected to the general manager leader, connected to the entry level across the organization. You have kind of vertical integration of mission and focus, and then funding that's tied to that and responsiveness to the community that can be really valuable. So at the end of the day, they are rooted in, community and tailored to affordability. And they do these things that people can see and feel. And I'll sort of end with, and we can move on to I think the last slide here. And you can move forward past that one. Yeah. What I've always said is like, I contacted, and again, this isn't a diss. This is really a statement of understanding and empathy for the types of things that like some of our larger jurisdictions have to deal with. I think of a jurisdiction like the city of Los Angeles, let's say. Let's go outside of, our scope and scale. I was just at a conference in LA, and it's just this massive metropolis, thriving city, right? Challenges beyond the imagination. And I think about the other day, I was at my local park, in Fair Oaks, and one of the swings was like so low, like my at the time, this was a couple of years ago, my then 3-year-old, she couldn't even swing on it. She was 3 years old. I don't think you can really swing any younger than that. And I called the office that day. A human answered the phone. I explained what happened, and by the next day, somebody had gone out there and fixed it. Right. Um, I don't imagine that would probably happen in the city of Los Angeles, is my guess. My guess is that a city council member in Los Angeles might not even, have been to the park that I was talking about, right? But that's all the Fair Oaks Rec and Park District does, and that kind of illustrates the point. So with that, I just thank you all for caring. Those of you who are special district officials, thanks for taking your time to be a part of this. The city and county officials, like recognizing that there is an opportunity for partnership here, between all of our jurisdictions for collaboration, for enhancing that, and maybe through enhancing our shared understanding, we have a chance to do some big things together and all better serve our communities by working together. So thank you for the time. Happy to take any questions and facilitate a little discussion out there.